We are back for another heart-to-heart conversation, and guess who I have on today? I feel like this is royalty, like President
No,
Haedon.
I'm not president anymore. We're also not at Pacific Lutheran University. I have no power here. No, just kidding.
But no, that's so perfect because that's how we met. It's when we were at PLU. We were both students, and at the time, yeah, you were serving as president of the, what do you call it?
The
Associated,
associate students. Yep.
yes, that.
Associate students at PLU.
ASPLU. Yep.
Yep.
And gosh, I forget how we even first started talking, but it was one of those scenarios where you don't know each other, you get together, you start talking, and it feels like you've known each other for forever. And I swear, Haydon, like we've only talked a couple times, but every time it's
Sure.
just everything's flowing. Like we can just riff on anything and talk about anything and everything. But today we have a specific topic. We're reining it in and we're centering our heart to heart conversation on autism. So let's start there. Haydon, please share a little bit of your story and why you're here talking about autism with us.
Yeah, no, yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm here because I just love talking about autism for what I love talking about my journey just as an autistic person and what that really has meant with me, just like interacting with people and just like the social development. Because to be quite frank, it's really fun to tell people about because it's not your. I definitely was not your average kid, especially with what was going on in my head, how I was perceiving things and whatnot. And I think it's awesome to have conversations like this because neurodiversity is important. Getting perspectives from other people and their journeys is important. And so, any way to divulge into more talks that promote diversity and growth, I think is awesome. I love hearing about other people and their experiences from other lens. And I just like to think I'm here where I can offer mine as someone who is autistic.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful lead in because I mean, I know autism is a spectrum, right? And so it's
Mm-hmm.
not like you, Haydon, are the voice for everyone with
Right.
autism and what you're saying
Yep.
here is truth, right? Like you're sharing your experience. And that's what Heart to
Mm-hmm.
Hearts are all about is us sharing our story and really opening up this space for others to share their story. And I think that leads to healing and growth. And so thank you. And I mean, you even I saw dabbled in this in PLU and used your story and created a platform for others. So will you speak a little to that first?
Yeah. So, as far as my involvement at PLU was concerned, as far as me sharing my my side of being like autistic and whatnot, as well as promoting conversation and growth around the general topic of the spectrum, was that in April of every year, it is Autism Awareness Month. And so I have an awesome friend named Nene Watts, who I used to partner with. And we used to have these series of events on campus where people could come and learn more about autism and a certain intersecting identity, such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, and whatnot. We invited other autistic individuals to come and speak as well, where we could, and we brought in various experts to talk about it. And at certain times, we were able to talk more about our personal approach to everything. I will say, as far as like the spectrum is concerned with me, I'm autistic, and I specifically have the lens of coming from somebody who was originally diagnosed with Aspergers, which is part of the spectrum. But when I was born, that was not entirely clear that that was part of the spectrum. It was considered related to autism, but then in 2012, that changed where Asperger's was officially put under the one popular way, another way is autism spectrum is autism umbrella. So I've heard that way put before. So yeah.
Whoa, yeah. So that shows that I mean we're always learning and evolving, and it's interesting because I mean I know I've heard that yeah Asperger's is a little different. There's similarities. So interesting.
Sorry, I think you cut out a little bit there. I didn't hear that last part.
Oh shoot. Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I was saying that, yeah, it's interesting because I've heard that, Asperger's is a different, it's like a totally different subsection, and it's similar to
Mhm.
autism, but not like within the umbrella. So it goes to show like we're always evolving and science is coming out with new things, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, oh yeah, because the DSM is essentially the dictionary of medical terms, and it's like, well, there's been an update to this word, kind of, but that update means it's a big, it can be a big change for sure. And so, and especially too, like, it can go as far as what that means as far as treatment, how a treatment's approached to you, to how you address what you diagnose yourself as, which is a really interesting way to go about it. And so, because it was sophomore year of high school where that changed, where I could, like, before I would just say I'm someone with Asperger's. I have Asperger's, and then it's like, oh, like, it's clear that you, like, I can identify as someone who's autistic because of this change. And so, and I thought the change did make sense in that area, because I really like how we look at more as spectrum. And autism, yeah, it's really grown where it used to be, because in the 40s and before, the diagnosis name for autism was not great. It was actually the R word. It was that was the official term that was for what is autism now. So yeah.
So for listeners, because I think I know which R word you're referring to, but I would love for you to
Yes.
explain that for the listeners.
Yeah, so yeah, when I said the R word, I do mean the word retarded. That was mental retardation was the official classification of someone who is autistic, from, I believe, the 1940s and prior, with like the 1880s, I believe, is when they first started to really start to recognize it, with some parts of the world maybe going as far back as the 1840s, maybe. And so yeah, and then in the 50s or 60s, that's when autism started to be used. But literally, one of the listed causes in the DSM manual, I don't remember what version, was literally that your mother didn't love you enough as a child. That was
Whoa.
literally the one of the causes of autism, the listed definite reasoning. And there's actually a great documentary that talks a little bit more about that, around Temple Grandin, who is an amazing autistic professor. And yeah, and her mom, if I remember correctly, was told that she did not love Temple enough. And if you watch the documentary or the movie about her life, it is very clear that she had a very loving and supporting mother. And so yeah, that's kind of the history of that side. So yeah.
Yeah, I love to delve into causes because like you
Yeah.
said, you hinted at, there's so many, I think, like maybe myths out there that people, oh, it was vaccines, that's why you have autism, right?
Yeah, I used to get that. I used to get that when I was younger. Growing up, my parents would tell me that they had friends who said that I was vaccinated, was the reason why that happened. Um, and so there has been numerous studies that have shown that there is no link between vaccines and autistic development. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, even if it did, like, why does that have to be a bad thing? But that's not how that works. So we don't need to go there. And so that's just always something I thought of. Um, but yeah, and so as far as causes, one of the many, like, the most prevalent one is just genetic pass downs. While it's not confirmed, there's a couple family members I have, especially men, who would probably diagnose if they had literally been born later, for example. And so there's actually a new study that I read from CNN that said that smoking marijuana when you're pregnant could cause autism, apparently now. So we're still trying to figure out how this is happening, and how it's caused and whatnot, especially with it being such a spectrum. There's so many different ways you could look at it and whatnot. And just because someone is autistic, someone else is autistic, we're going to have completely different ways about how we approach things, how we're going to socialize. Because I can tell you what I do to make myself feel better in socially uncomfortable situations, and what I used to cope. But that is not the same way that my brother, who is also autistic, he copes a completely different way in social situations. So, and he's my biological brother, but he has a completely different approach than I do. So that just kind of shows how unique this diagnosis can be for people.
Yes, and I'd love for you, if you're open to it, to share with us what are your go-tos when you are in a socially uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. To get started with that, I'm going to go back to what I used to do to kind of show like what happens when you're younger versus what you happens when you're older. One example I can think of to share is when I was in preschool, actually. If someone said something to me or asked me something and I had no idea how to respond to it, which was almost everything, I was used to talking to my parents, and when I actually couldn't form sentences until I was 4 years old. And so that is pretty common with people who are autistic, is they're just building sentence structure just takes longer, simply. And so in preschool, like I said, if someone asked me a question, said something to me I didn't know how to respond to, I literally would respond with, my favorite color is blue. It doesn't matter what the context was. It didn't matter like what was said before. And that's not that other autistic people, like that's just not something that we just all do. That is just what I did. And so yeah, everyone knew my favorite color was blue. And so um there's stuff like that where we don't know what to say or do, and that's where pathologist is important. To this day, I still don't really care for going for concerts personally, or like really loud settings for the most part, because it's like a sensory overload thing for me. Sensory overload is something that autistic people have, and we react to all kinds of things differently. My brother loves concerts. I don't like concerts. It's like this weird scratchy feeling, and what I usually do in those situations is that I'll usually go on my phone and read something about politics, because I love reading about politics. And so I kind of delve into my interests. Some other autistic people, they'll use fidget spinners. They'll use like that is a legitimate way to go about it. And that's probably one of the most common ones I've seen. It really is. They really are awesome and helpful. I know people who are autistic who, if they just kind of walk around and like talk to themselves, have a conversation, or if they're just mimicking noises from a movie that they watched, that's an approach that people do sometimes. I used to do that all the time as a kid. I would just randomly make TIE fighter noises from Star Wars because I loved that noise. So, yeah, like if I was in a social situation I wasn't really down for, or it was like people were playing tag at recess and I wasn't really invited, that I would zone out and just thinking about Star Wars or Bionicles, or actually like what the president is doing, probably because I was into politics at a young age. So yeah.
Whoa, yeah. Super awesome insight. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really cool too to see how your love for politics is just kind of interwoven into it. And how cool that you freaking were the president at PLU. Like that is a huge accomplishment, and like way to go for your dreams.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I actually have been thinking a lot about, like, in the past, like why politics, because and we've talked about this too, like every autistic person has a superpower. You know everything, or a lot of things about one subject or a couple subjects usually. And for me, politics and drawing maps are my two things. I actually think that being bullied as a kid is what led me into politics, actually, because I essentially would get bullied. People would call me names, and then I would ask my parents, like, hey, what can we do to like make this stop? And then like I would see President Bush on TV, and I would ask them, like, why, who is this person, what is he doing? They're like, oh, well, he's essentially like the CEO of the country. And I'd be like, so like he could change rules to stop stuff from this happening. And they were like, perhaps down the chain, or like, there's some people, like the mayor would do something like that for specifically for Portland. And I was like, oh, okay. So if I want these things to stop, I need that job. And so that's literally like what started it for me. So yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that it was due to bullying that you found politics, but hey, I
Yeah.
mean, it is a great way to make change, and like at the grassroots level too. I mean, it's not like I saw you at PLU, right? Like, you're interacting with the students. You're actually wanting to get our voices and just like work for the people.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's the only way I can really see myself doing work, honestly. That's just what I love doing is, I've I have my ways of how I've been talked down or beat down, but other people have different reasonings or approaches as to why that's happening to them, and I just want to do everything I can to stop societal discomfort when there's especially multiple approaches to things. Yeah, that's kind of what pushes me into politics. But yeah.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper into that because you're talking about your superpowers as an autistic
Yeah.
individual, and you're talking about this passion for politics. And so, kind of like, where do you go from here? How are you going to combine your superpowers with your love for politics, and make a difference in the world?
Yeah. One superpower that a lot of autistic people have in common is we tend to be very detail oriented, and in politics, for example, that is something that can go a long way. Almost any job that can go in a long way, and so for me, I think. I mean, you were talking about how cool it was that I was doing by president, especially someone who is autistic, because yeah, it is a very social job, and socializing and being autistic it's harder. That it is harder, and so we don't learn social cues as well just from watching people and kind of breaking down what happened as well as other people do. That's why pathologists are so important. But anyways, with the superpower aspect, yeah. So for me, it's like I naturally am already trying to like talk to as many people as I can, learn as many stories as I can, reading history and whatnot, and learning what other people use to develop solutions. And so I'm hoping that if I'm in a position where I can implement policy, I can cite back the knowledge I've learned to solve problems. At PLU, that looked like trying to get funding to build a wheelchair ramp, renovate sidewalk paths, because people with APLU was not a very ADA compliant campus, simply put. And so I wanted to make a change in that because that affected a particular group of people, but not the rest of campus as much. But it was an issue that I would say that campus cared about a lot. So, yeah.
So there's something I want to circle back to that you've been mentioning, and I'm like, huh. I know I would like some clarification, probably the listeners too.
Yeah.
It seems like
Yeah.
you're saying like, oh, that's where pathology comes in, or that's why pathologists are important. So will you touch on that
Mm-hmm.
a little more?
Absolutely. So I loved having a pathologist from kindergarten through ninth grade. That's how long I had used a pathologist. So I was lucky enough to have a pathologist through the public education system in Portland, and so not every school district, from what I understand, offers pathologists for free always. Sometimes they don't have them and they refer them. Portland Public Schools, luckily enough, and I think most school districts have pathologists for students. And so, what was awesome about having a pathologist is like there could be a time at recess where, like, let's just say, like in fourth grade, I think we were trying to play some sort of like fantasy game, like where we would all play around, but like I would try to create all of these rules that I thought were fun, but other people didn't. But like when we're that young, people don't necessarily say why they don't like the thing it is. They'll just start being mean to you. And so with the pathologist, I could go up to her and I could say like, what is that? So basically I could be like, what just happened? Like this happened at recess and now nobody wants to like play with me. And I like, why? And so like that person was someone who could like try to understand what happened. And then would then go into detail about like what happened, like, and then give you ideas about what to do in the future. In this case, it would be like, oh, like maybe hear what a few other people want to propose first and see if like if anything they say is something that you want to do too, reinforce that, for example. Also, it was like a cool space because like I can meet other people who were also autistic or maybe had another social disability of some sort, and we would actually be able to hang out and play games together. And so in a sense, we were able to literally practicing socializing with each other without really like recognizing that's what was happening. And so, but it was fun and whatnot. I will say though, it was really weird. Like I remember going up thinking like, oh wait, why am I leaving like my classroom and everyone else is staying here, but I'm just leaving to meet with this other person? So there was a weird element with that. Because then it's like there's kind of like you start to wonder like, why does no one else have to do this but I have to do this? And so there is a flip side to the coin in that area. I'm still super grateful I had a pathologist and whatnot, and I had parents who were willing to explain to me why that was the case, because people never understand that and they feel different. And then sometimes they'll have a bad pathologist maybe and whatnot. But I was lucky enough where I had a great pathologist and good parents. I was able to understand what was going on and whatnot. And I was able to actually get like extended time on taking tests in high school and college because of my pathologist, because, you know, this was someone who recognized that I have anxiety during tests. And that is something that not everyone else has to go through. So having that additional time allowed me to adjust and cope a little bit longer to get through this barrier that not everyone else has. And so a pathologist in short is awesome because they can help you understand certain things. They can give you like a social interaction manual in a sense. Like no one else will do that for you except for maybe your parents if you know what to ask, or your pathologist.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's a safe space, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
to explore and kind of try things on. And yeah, you recognize that, oh, I'm leaving the class and other kids may not have to do this. But it's wonderful because it is one of those, I guess, resources to help you thrive, and in addition to the maybe extended time on tests, it's it's a way to what is the word, like accommodate for neurodiversity, right? Like we don't all process things the same. Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shoot, I thought I lost my
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting because like it actually a law passed a year before I started at PLU that actually made the whole timing extension transfer into PLU a lot easier. Um, there was like a one rare bipartisan bill that passed in 2014. I say rare because the Republicans controlled Congress, but Obama was president. And this is 2015, so right before I started at PLU, that basically removed this financial barrier to continue like your like services from high school. Like I was told by the director of disability services at PLU that like, yeah, literally a year ago and beyond and prior to that, you would have actually had to pay like a $270 fee to like literally like be able to use your time extension. And it wasn't because of a university policy, but it was like some sort of strange federal policy that was applied to universities that was changed during the Obama years under a Republican Congress. And so, yeah, and so literally it was just crazy to me to think like I would have to pay that was essentially like a pre-existing necessity for me to thrive in education as well as everybody else. So, yeah.
Right. And I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier when you were talking about what you and is it Nene?
Yes.
Yeah, what you and Nene were doing at PLU, about how even for folks with autism, there's like this whole spectrum of each individual, right? Depending on socioeconomic status, but depending on race and all of those different factors. And so I know this is like we're getting like into the nitty gritty and the deep, but this is what I live
Yeah.
for. This is heart to heart
Yes.
right here. And so will you
Yes.
dive deeper into that?
Yeah. So Yeah, the diagnosis journey and the spectrum and where you lie on the spectrum, your race and your gender are all factors that really determine if and when you get diagnosed. So I was lucky enough that I was diagnosed at the age of 4 years old. And so I say lucky because especially in the let's see, that would have been the year 2000 or 2001. Back then, especially, I think the average age of diagnosing somebody was a couple years older. It was 6. Now it's starting to look more like 2 to 4 years old, I would say, on average nowadays. um, but if you're white, you're much more likely to have an earlier diagnosis than a person of color is likely to. I was actually the main reason I was even diagnosed was because my preschool teacher was the first person to ever say to my parents, like, I think Haydon has Asperger syndrome. And I was my parents' oldest child, and so like I am ground zero for for child raising for them, and so they had no idea that me not learning how to form sentences until I was 4 years old was considered late and whatnot. And compared to my average peers, my eye contact was non-existent. I was looking everywhere else but people's eyes or at people. I wanted to look at the Legos. I wanted to look at the cool, colorful poster on the wall, um, and whatnot. But and then so basically, when she noticed that I wasn't socializing as well, when I was saying that my favorite color was blue and whatnot, that's what led her to wonder if I was autistic or not. But fun fact, because of laws at the time, why my doctor said that she could have made an official medical diagnosis for me, that was not what happened. What we ended up doing is we were able to get the school district to recognize it. And the reason why medically we did not move forward with me being officially diagnosed as someone with Asperger's was because prior to the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, pre-existing conditions meant higher insurance costs. And so literally, if I had moved forward with being medically diagnosed as somebody with Asperger's, there would have been a rise in my parents' health insurance. And so now with Obamacare, that is no longer the case because there's a provision preventing additional charges for pre-existing conditions in that regard, and just completely banning discrimination on pre-existing conditions. And so there was that factor. But I know a lot of people who are autistic who were not diagnosed until their teens, and that is not always the greatest problem because I know people who did take that long to get diagnosed, and there's because of how our society works, the whole pathologist approach with the whole like, why am I leaving the room and everyone else is, if you're not diagnosed at an early age, you kind of start to have this what's wrong with me mentality. um and it's really easy just with the way how everything functions, and because people don't see autism for the superpowers that has a lot of the time, even if you are diagnosed at a young age, you kind of have like a what's wrong with me, why am I different. But that was part of the reason why I loved the X-Men so much when I was a kid, because in the show, the X-Men are mutants and they have these cool powers, but society is terrified of them. And they have like senators in the show who are trying to like kill mutants or whatnot. And I honestly found that show to be kind of relatable in a more extreme sense. And so um yeah, I hope that answered your question. I don't know if I got a little off there, but yeah.
I mean, there's just so much within that question. I love that you shared, from your experience and growing up, what it was like. And
Mm,
I'm sure we could like have a whole other heart to heart conversation with like you and Nene, almost like a round table of just,
yes.
yeah, like life with autism and your
Hmm.
experiences.
Hmm.
Um, I know before we pressed record, you were talking about an autism conference that you attended, and so
Yes.
if you're open to it, can you share maybe some takeaways from that and just some things that listeners that you would like them to know and to be able to understand more about folks with autism?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nene told me in the fall of 2018. So this was our 4th year together at PLU. She was telling me about this autism conference, this new annual autism conference. I believe this was for its 2nd year in a row at UW or University of Washington, Bothell. And what was really awesome about this conference and was that it was completely ran and facilitated by autistic people. And the whole purpose of it was to really you can delve into certain subjects about learning more about autism. And what was one of the coolest takeaways from it, in my opinion, is how much I would love to see just us as a society change a couple things to be more neurodiverse friendly. What I mean by that, for example, is at the conference, we started off with talking about I guess social approaches, and what I mean by that, for example, is they were saying if you need to leave the room because of sensory overload or whatever, have at it. If and we talked about too with if you're on your phone while people are talking, let's not take offense to that. We were saying when we broke out to these side rooms, we would say things okay, we don't all have to sit at the classroom chairs. If you want to sit on the ground or lay down on the ground and pay attention, do it. I know somebody who came into one of our conference rooms and just and at first this person was outside of the room and the door was open and and then they came down, they'd lay down on the ground, played on their phone for a bit, and then but was listening, and we broke off into smaller groups. And I think the average person would have thought this person's a slacker. They obviously weren't paying attention, but that was not the case. This person was just as engaged in conversation in our small groups as the person who was sitting at the table and, from what you could tell, was attentive the whole time. And so basically what I'm trying to say is that I really would love to see a change to a lot of the what we see as necessities to function in shared spaces. In my opinion, after that conference, I was like, you know what, we all shouldn't have to just sit at this chair and the same tables and do stuff like that, because there's some people where they won't learn as well, and people think that when they are laying on the ground that they are slacking. And so one of my biggest takeaways is I hope to see in the future that we become more we just share more neurodiverse policies or recognitions or acknowledgments like that, because for so many autistic people, just making those few social changes could mean higher graduation rates. It could mean higher success rates for autistic people and whatnot. And so, yeah, that was one of my bigger takeaways. Another big takeaway was this concept of, and I hadn't thought about this too much. So I think one thing that people kind of struggle about especially when people are attempting to be politically correct, is how you address somebody who's autistic. Because sometimes, and maybe some people don't even think about that this much. When you're talking about, let's say you're a parent of someone who's autistic. I personally, just as a kid, I love being referred as somebody who is autistic, or I am an autistic person. Depending on how you say it, for example, saying, oh yeah, this person has autism, or oh yeah, my kid has autism, it sounds kind of like a disease when you put it that way. Sometimes it depends on kind of how you're saying it, what your tone is, exactly how you're talking about it. And we don't like being referred to like we have diseases. I think there's a growing sense of autistic patriotism in some people, and I think being autistic is awesome. I can't imagine not being autistic. I think it's helped me out more than it's hindered me. So yeah, and so those were the two biggest takeaways I'd say is it'd be cool if we had more social adaptations in the classrooms and other shared spaces with each other, and just really thinking about how you refer to your autistic buddy.
Yes, so good. Thank you for sharing. And I'm so with you with the social adaptations. It's interesting because I found myself thinking about, how would I perceive that scenario? And at first it is like, oh, how dare they? That's disrespectful. They're on the phone when they're talking, or laying on the ground. But then I'm like, why are we all sheep? Why are we told to sit down and shut up and listen?
Or like, why do you care about the other person over there? They're not doing anything to hinder your learning, you know? Like, so yeah. Yeah. Like, you know, if someone's like being loud in the corner or something like that, that would be a little different because that's hindering other people's learning. But like, I think we can make some changes that can make the learning environments more accessible. And so like yeah, like when I was younger, I used to love drawing. Well, I heard a teacher lecturing me and I was told not to do that because they think that I am just completely zoning out and drawing, but in actuality I am listening to you. I have a place for my eyes to be, because especially younger autistic people, like I said, eye contact and like looking at someone when they're talking, it doesn't come natural to us. Actually, one of the newest cool versions of this new study I was reading about, it's so awesome, about getting 1-year-olds or like even infants to see if they're autistic. It's a new study. It's not official yet. They're still experimenting on the accuracy. Is if you take a baby or a toddler and you don't know if they're autistic or not, the child that is less likely to be autistic, if you have like a TV screen with people making funny faces, but then you have another screen next to it with all these colorful shapes moving around the screen, the non-autistic kid will probably stare at the faces 9 times out of 10, look at the shapes on occasion, look back at the faces. But the autistic child, they will probably look straight at the shapes and either only look at those, or they'll give it like the faces one glance or a couple and then just go straight back to the shapes, because we I don't know, eye contact is weird. I was lucky enough, my parents told me to approach that. They're like, look at somebody right here between their eyebrows because the eyes aren't as daunting and they think you're looking at them in their eyes. So yeah.
Whoa, yeah. I mean, finding ways to make it work, because I know I've been told, maybe by my parents, probably by people just like through school and everything, of yeah, like show respect, look me in the eyes, right? But if that's daunting for you and if that's just a no-go, then how do you function in society as a somewhat, whatever normal is, somewhat normal
Yeah.
human being? Right?
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's also interesting. And like, you know, for some people, as soon as you learn the eye contact thing, all of a sudden, like, and like this is something that I've talked about with the pathologist. They're like, maybe sometimes don't always look at your eyes. Because for me, you know, like I said, like this whole concept of wanting a social manual sounds awesome, because like I'm told, okay, look at people in the eyes, and this is something that other autistic people experience, maybe with different lessons. But that, so then like as a 9-year old or whatever, all of a sudden I'm like staring you down at your eyes hard, and all of a sudden I'm making people uncomfortable. And I go to my pathologist and I'm like, look, I'm told to look people in the eyes. All of a sudden that's a bad thing. What is going on? and so and so yeah, they were like, maybe like give 10 seconds in the eyes, look somewhere else, and then go back. And then like yeah, it's so exhausting. And you're like, what do people want? What do you want me to do? And that's what's going through my head like all the time in school when I was younger. So
Yeah, because
yeah.
you're trying to be present in the conversation, but then you're also counting in your head like 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah,
5.
yeah, no, that's exactly what starts happening. And yeah, it's just so funny to like learning social lessons. It's just like like I just an autistic person, it's like, why are you telling me to do this, but then it's wrong? What then it's wrong later? Or you're the way, like, why can't it just simply be like, do this, you're done? It's like and so yeah, or like we had like just learning social cues is just does not come as easily for us. And so it yeah.
Well, and I hear you talk about this, social manual type
Yeah,
thing, right? Like an instruction booklet. And I'm thinking about it, and it's like that would be great. And it would totally differ between cultures too. Like one social
hmm,
manual for the US would be way different from, say, a social manual in South America.
exactly, that's the other thing. And so like, you know, diversity is important, like I've said before. And one, but yeah, absolutely, like there are so many different cultural perceptions about how you go about socializing. And so a social manual sounds great, but we're not all robots. And sometimes as an autistic person, you almost wish people were robots, but then you like kind of grow up more and you're like, no, actually a robot maybe wouldn't be the best way to go about it. But uh, yeah, you're like, you want to be more straightforward, but that's not always how it works. And so in short, like if we just make some social adaptations in learning spaces and that's another reason too, like ethnic studies and like just learning more about culture at a young age and diversity is important, because if you grow up with a bunch of people who look like you and act like you, that's going to hinder you in all kinds of different ways in the future. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, totally. 100%. Gosh, we've covered so much and I feel like there's so much more. I do like
Yeah.
to, right? There's always more.
Hmm.
I do like to give space at the end here for you, Haydon. Say if I didn't ask a question that you would like to touch on, or if there's just something that you'd like to use this time to talk about, go for it.
Ooh, yeah, I appreciate that. Actually, there is something that I like to think about. So, again, I can tell you all about my autistic experience. I can't tell you everybody else's. I can tell you a couple themes that we may share in common from observation or stuff I've read. But one thing I kind of want to challenge listeners to kind of think of when it comes to autistic people, especially with the superpower thing, is I want people in general to think autism less and less as something that is bad. It's not a bad thing. It's neurodiversity. And I'm actually going to relate this to video games really quick in a really interesting way. So basically, like, let's say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or you're playing a video game where like you have certain scores for your speed and your strength and whatnot. Now, if you convert that to like everyday life, I kind of like to think, and I've talked to other autistic people about this too, like I like to think as autism as a skill point reallocation, basically. Like, so like let's say like non-autistic people, they're a little bit more balanced in their skill points. Let's just say like if like, but I would say like autistic people, it's like okay, like it's balanced overall, but like socializing might be a little lower at first, depends how old you are, what your experiences are. But then like we have a higher skill point, and like if for me, I would say like compared to my peers, especially in grade school, I knew a lot more about politics and history than my average peers. And that was one of the few areas where I was viewed as a smart kid at the time. And so it's like, yeah, it's like it's more of a skill point reallocation that's not as averaged out in a sense. um it's not just a bad thing. Like, yeah, like sure, like I would have liked to have maybe some same social cue perceptions as my peers do, but to me, like getting so attracted to, and learning to about politics and being able to draw a map from 1914 onward without looking at a map is so worth having a little drawback and learning how to talk to people a little bit. So yeah, and so yeah, so there's kind of like I like to encourage people to kind of think of a skill point reallocation when you're thinking about um, autism. And yeah, and just one thing I like to mention too is like, part of the reason why I want to encourage neurodiversity and people adapting to how we approach classrooms, learning spaces, and workspaces is we as autistic people, we learn so much about how other people, or by other people, I mean non-autistic people, interact, socialize, and whatnot. But there's not a whole lot of the other way around. There's not a whole lot of non-autistic people learning about how autistic people socialize and function. And I hope people kind of think about that more. We as a society spend more time learning how to communicate with our animals sometimes than autistic people or other people with disabilities. Like we learn things like, oh, like a lot of people care about like, oh, like, for example, with dogs, you shouldn't have to, you don't have a hand signal and speak to the dog to sit at the same time, because that's two different parts of their brain at work. More people are more likely to talk about how a dog's brain functions, I think, more than how a neurodiverse human thinks sometimes. And we're so focused on autistic people and people with disabilities learning how to interact with non-autistic people. But I wish we would just spend a little bit more time learning about how we all interact with each other. And so that's kind of what I wanted to include right there.
Thank you. I love the analogy.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, such a good, I see it as kind of a call to action for listeners of, okay, if you're listening to this, like, how can we move forward? Because it's cool to talk about this, right? But then
Yeah.
it's like, let's like make meaning of it and be proactive in, yeah, like how can we, just be more I don't even know the term you use, more socially diverse, did you say? Or
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and as far as learning more outside of here, like I actually like to encourage people not to go to Autism Speaks that much. It's one of the more popular resources for autism, and the reason why I say it is going back to that whole like someone has autism. It's just from my experience and other autistic people, and this actually got brought up at the conference. It just feels like Autism Speaks kind of comes from that sick that we need to recover and cure you, because their website literally talks about how there's no cure for autism. And I say, why do we need a cure for autism? Why don't we just socially adapt as a society? And so reading books or watching stuff from Temple Grandin's awesome. Any book that is from an autistic person's perspective. John Asperger, if I remember correctly, is the name of the doctor who, for example, created the analysis or the single point of Asperger's. Like, learn about the spectrum. There's like 7 different names under the autism umbrella or spectrum, of Asperger's being one of them. I can speak a lot on the Asperger side of things, but there are all kinds of different areas under the autism spectrum disorder. So
yeah, so many good resources, and of course you are a resource. So how can people connect with you?
Yes. I love chatting with people and talking to people, especially during this time of COVID. Hit me up online. I am on Facebook, Haedon Brunelle. Instagram, it's at president period, and then my first name without the N. You can hit me up there. I also use Gmail, HaydonCash@gmail.com. So yeah.
Perfect. And we'll include all of those in the show notes. And yeah, I mean, if you're listening and if you yourself have autism, or if you know someone with autism, we would love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to me, reach out to Haydon. Really, like, this is just the start of the conversation, this heart to heart. And we love for it to kind of ripple out and to hear the impact that it's making. So we'd love to hear from you. And until next time, thank you so much, Haydon.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Yeah, hit me up. I love talking about autism. You can hit me up with 0 context about what you're asking me this question. I will answer it. So
love it.